Professor Zix adjusted the thermal sensors on her observation pod, her 4 crystalline eyes, focusing intently on the small bipedal figure, struggling against the howling winds below. The creature designation, Homo sapiens, was barely visible through the swirling maelstrom of ice and snow that had engulfed the planet's northern hemisphere for the past 72 standard time units. "Fascinating," she murmured into her neural recorder, her voice a melodic series of harmonic frequencies that would have sounded like singing to human ears. Subject continues to exhibit extraordinary resilience despite atmospheric temperature readings of -120 degrees Celsius. The storm that raged across the frozen wasteland of Earth's Arctic region was unlike anything in the planet's recorded history. Climate destabilization had reached critical levels, turning what was once merely inhospitable into something truly alien, ironically appropriate, given her own origins from the Andromeda spiral. Yet here was this fragile carbon-based lifeform, not fleeing from the deadly conditions, but actively working within them. Dr. Sarah Chen, though the alien professor didn't know her name, had been separated from her research expedition 3 days ago, when the unprecedented superstorm struck. Her emergency shelter had been torn apart by winds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour, her communication equipment destroyed, and her rescue beacon lost somewhere in the endless white void. Most species would have perished within the first few hours, but humans, Professor Zix was learning, were remarkably stubborn about dying. The human had begun constructing what Zix cultural database identified as an igloo, a traditional shelter design from the indigenous peoples of this very region. But the construction taking place below was far from traditional. Sarah had modified the ancient technique with modern survival knowledge, creating a hybrid structure that combined ancestral wisdom with contemporary engineering principles. Note the systematic approach. Zix spoke to her recorder, her tentacled appendages dancing across holographic controls to adjust the observation equipment's focus. The subject appears to understand the thermodynamics involved. Each ice block is carefully selected for optimal density and thermal insulation properties. Through the howling wind, Sarah worked with methodical precision, despite her bulky survival suit becoming increasingly rigid in the extreme cold. Her movements were economical, each action serving a purpose. She had identified a snowdrift with the right consistency, not too powdery, not too hard, and was cutting uniform blocks with the emergency multi-tool, the only piece of equipment that had survived the destruction of her shelter. What amazed Professor Zix most was the human's apparent understanding of physics that her species had only codified through scientific study. Sarah instinctively knew to cut the blocks in a spiral pattern, creating a dome that would be self-supporting while distributing weight evenly. She understood that the interior would warm from her body heat, causing the inner surface to melt slightly and then refreeze, creating a glazed shell that would strengthen the entire structure. The creature demonstrates intuitive grasp of thermodynamics, Zix noted with growing excitement. This was exactly the kind of behavioral data that would revolutionize xenobiology studies back at the Galactic University. Despite lacking our advanced computational abilities, it instinctively applies complex engineering principles developed through cultural evolution and individual adaptation. As the storm intensified, Sarah's movements became more urgent but no less precise. She had to pause periodically to warm her hands inside her jacket, and Zix could detect the biological stress indicators even through her alien equipment: elevated heart rate, increased metabolic activity, cellular damage from extreme cold exposure. Yet the human persisted. The igloo began to take shape, row by row, each block placed with the care of a master craftsperson. Sarah had even thought to create a small entrance tunnel below the main floor level, understanding that this would trap warm air inside while allowing carbon dioxide to escape a sophisticated ventilation system that prevented both suffocation and heat loss. "Remarkable adaptation," Zixthala whispered. Her own species had evolved on a world of eternal spring, where temperature variations rarely exceeded 5 degrees. They had conquered the galaxy through technology, but watching this human work, she began to understand there were different kinds of intelligence, different ways of conquering hostile environments. As Sarah placed the final capstone block, completing her shelter just as the storm reached its most violent peak, Professor Zixthala found herself feeling something unexpected: admiration. This was not mere survival, it was artistry born from necessity, ancient knowledge channeled through modern desperation to create something beautiful and functional. The completed igloo stood like a small monument to human ingenuity against the backdrop of the apocalyptic storm. Inside, Sarah would have a space that her body heat could warm to survivable temperatures, protection from winds that could strip flesh from bone, and a chance to wait out the storm that meteorologists predicted would last another 2 days. Conclusion: Professor Zixthala spoke into her recorder as she prepared to transmit her findings back to the research vessel orbiting beyond Earth's atmosphere. Humanity's greatest strength may not be their technology or their numbers, but their ability to adapt ancestral knowledge to unprecedented challenges. They are not merely survivors, they are improvisers, artists of survival. She paused her recording and, against all protocol, activated the universal translator and opened a communication channel. Human, her translated voice carried down through the storm. "Your shelter is aesthetically pleasing and functionally superior. This observer wishes to express admiration for your craftsmanship." Sarah looked up from where she was catching her breath inside her completed igloo, certain the wind was playing tricks on her mind. But through the howling storm, she could have sworn she heard someone speaking to her in perfect English, telling her that her igloo was beautiful. In the warmth of her ice sanctuary, she smiled and whispered back to the storm, "Thank you, whoever you are." Above, Professor Zixthala smiled too, a complex shifting of facial crystals that conveyed deep appreciation, and began composing her report on the most remarkable species she had ever studied.